Good evening to everyone. Good evening to all who joined us today for very important discussion on leading the way to for sustainability in business. I'm Virginia Poškutė. I am associate professor at ISM University. I'm economist and social policy analyst. It is my great honor to moderate this discussion today with exquisite discussants that we will have today. Discussants that are coming from Lithuania and abroad, that are experts in sustainability practices, that have extensive experiences in various professional activities. So today we are going to discuss challenges that businesses are facing nowadays. Challenges that are pressuring businesses to change their way of action, way of performance. How and which businesses are affected most? How that changing environment around businesses is changing labor markets, and what kind of specialists are needed for businesses today? And final question, how to lead the business sustainability. So it is my great honor to lead the discussion today. And before introducing my guests and speakers of today, I would like to let you know that at the end of our discussion, we will have also some breaking news. So please do stay tuned until the very end. And I hope that this message will also might affect your decisions for future. So I would like to also to encourage you to ask and post questions in the chat box, and it will be my pleasure to deliver those questions to the discussants. Those that are watching us on Delfi TV, please do also ask questions through comment sections, and we will also try to accommodate them and deliver to the speakers. So just before starting the discussion, I would like to introduce our discussants, our experts of sustainability today. It is my great honor to present Dr. Uzbek Amini, Head of Sustainability and Industry for Practice for Europe, Middle East and Africa region at Cognizant in the Netherlands. So Uzbek, welcome, and thank you for participating in the discussion.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be among you and have a discussion here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for Uzbek. And second, our discussant, it's our great partner and collaborator in a lot of activities, Mariano Andrade Gonzalez, country manager at Moody's Lithuania. Mariano, thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you very much, Virginia. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And third, our discussant, my dear colleague, Dr. Dalius Misiūnas, President of ISM University and Chairman of the board at OGA Group. So Daliu, thank you also for being on holidays and participating in this very important discussion.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Okay, so thank you very much for all the discussants. And before asking questions, I would like just to mention that importance of sustainability is growing from all sides. International and national organizations are increasingly regulating business environments. The customers are willing to have more sustainable products, services. So everything is changing. And businesses have to respond to that changing environment. Employees also have their own expectations. So let me start with a question towards Dalius. And Daliau, you have experience in a variety of businesses. Next to leading university, you worked in businesses. You are still present in Auga Group, who is known for sustainability initiatives. You also participate. You are a member of supervisory boards at Swedbank. So those are very different institutions. So having this variety of experience, could you please share with us, is there any difference in relation to industry towards requirements for sustainability? Which industries are most affected by those changing requirements? What would be your insights on that?
Okay, so what are the main challenges and main differences? Well, I would say that one of the major challenges is that we still have not that clear definition. When we talk sustainability, a lot of people still think it's about carbon footprint or net zero, which is very popular at the moment. And not so many of us think about ESG as a balanced thing between environmental, social, and governance topics or aspects of every business. So this is one. How clear is the definition? And it's not clear. It's not there yet. I think it's still to be defined. Secondly, the regulation. There is a clear expectation and rising expectation from employees and clients towards companies to be more sustainable, to be more socially responsible, and to have a more transparent governance. However, the regulators, they are lagging behind. They are still not there with a clear standard, for instance. We hear that it will be coming, but it's not there yet. So it's left towards businesses to define their own ambition. And obviously, when it is defined by the business itself, it doesn't happen so that everybody has the same definition or the same standard in the end of the day. And when we think further, even the place of the sustainability and the ESG within organization is still not unified. Oftentimes it is more about marketing, and brand building rather than core business itself. And this is going to be gradually changing, I believe. Yeah. In terms of how different industries are exposed, well, I would say we have some industries that are coming first in line and some industries that will be coming later. And one clear source of change and source of expectations is investors. The financing and investment world is talking about green financing, green investment for a long time now, and this is where a lot of things are coming from. For instance, working on the board of the bank, I can clearly see that ESG is already a natural part of core business in the bank. On the other hand, working for a company like Auga, I see that some businesses, and obviously Auga is one of these businesses, they have put sustainability as a center point of their strategy. And naturally, this means that sustainability is everywhere within business, not just in the marketing department, so to say. And probably the other place where we see a lot of push for sustainability is energy and utility sector, because this is related to a big change towards reducing carbon footprint and towards greener energy, and that obviously is accompanied with different reporting and targets for ESG. And so far, it is quite clear that we are talking about larger businesses, multinational companies listed companies, first of all, and sustainability and ESG is not a topic for small and medium enterprises, at least not until now. And this is maybe we will discuss later in this conversation, but I think there are also practical reasons for that.
Thank you very much, Daliau. So thank you for your insights. And now I'm turning to Mariano. Mariano, you have exquisite experience in leading companies, multiple companies in different contexts, in different countries. Now you are leading Moody's in Lithuania. So what is your perspective on sustainability requirements and how Moody's is tackling those sustainability challenges?
Thanks for the question, Virginia. I think I will, capitulate a little bit on what Daliau just saying and expand a little bit some of his opinions. There are two key things here from the Moody's perspective. One is how are we tackling sustainability and ESGs internally as a corporation? And second one, how are we integrating that risk as part of our assessment as a business? So we have already begun to include our ESG scores in some of the industries. And as the years goes by, we're going to amplify that. Because I think what is very important towards what Daliau was mentioning, when you think about sustainability or even ESGs, people tend to go towards climate change because that's the urgent matter that has been heavily advertised upon. But ESG is very complex. You have supply chains and how do you measure them? You have know your customer as an integral part of monitoring your supply chain. You have human rights, which you include LGBTQ rights, you include ethnicity, you include all the spectrum of diversity. And more importantly, just in that factor is how do you tackle that problem on disclosures and reporting in Europe when you have GDPR, where you cannot go and ask your employees to disclose their ethnicity or their preferences. So that is one key challenge that needs to be discussed at a higher level with governments for us to be able to disclose that. In the US, for example, on our sustainability report, we include that. We include ethnicity and we map it out towards the corporate grade. We map it out towards the education background and the level of training that we're giving to employees. Further down the line, we also have to integrate the rest of the industries and educate them to what's a standard. And I think Moody's is going to play a pivotal role here because we have a presence in over 140 countries. We have access to multiple industries. We have, millions of data points inside our database. And how are you going to be tracking those data points for the data to be reliable, for the data to be able to be disclosed, and how do you tie that up to an ESG score? Hoping that when you start impacting with an ESG score, the reputation of your company, you're going to influence that positive change to what's really and truly embracing ESGs. So we have a long way to go, as Daliau was just mentioning. The taxonomy has just been disclosed. The way it's going to be governed is yet to be confirmed. And how the companies and how the corporations in general, plus the population, you mentioned something very important, Virginia, and I think that is people. The new generations, the younger generations, they have already embedded a better understanding on ESGs. They want to see not only who are they going to be working with, but what are the values this company stands for and how they measure those values. That's a key integral point of change for the society in the coming years. Another point where you guys play a pivotal role as well is education. I think we need to start already from the education point of view, what the ESG scores mean, what the ESG in general means, and how each one of the individuals in society, the government, the private sector, and the people can impact that ESG, can contribute to make it to make it a standard and to make it an embedded part of the way you're going to be operating. So there is a lot of work to do, and I think this forum is a good way to start. It's a good way to kick it off. It's a good way to start educating the private sector, the government, and the people.
Thank you very much, Mariano. And so we are so lucky to have Moody's in Lithuania, since you mentioned that you have such database and already some experience how to how to assess and measure, evaluate impact that business is making. So we are very glad, and we are looking forward that we as educational institution will have possibility to share your knowledge. So thank you very much. And now, Rozbek, I'm turning to you. You are sustainability experts, and I'm not exaggerating saying that, since you initiated and you are leading Cognizant's environment sustainability offerings and services. You as well strategize sustainability services roadmaps across the region that you take care of. So what is your perspective on this? And if you could share with us your insights, what are the main changes that businesses will have to make along its functions in relation to sustainability requirements, and how those sustainability challenges will affect value chains of businesses? So a lot of questions to you.
Yeah, thank you. Great question, Virginia. So sustainability is such a broad and a large topic that it's quite difficult to imagine that one can call himself an expert in it. It's a very it's like an umbrella topic. It covers a lot of things. So in my opinion, it brings a new dimension and thinking to the classic science and technology and business concepts. And that's where the role of education becomes very important to show how this transformation of thinking will take place. So the changes that we see are mostly due to a new thinking, which is not necessarily aligned with how classic industry is thinking. Traditionally, companies are trying to minimize their own cost of producing services or products to bring something to the market that has a lower price point, so is more competitive, mostly in average, because some companies have other selling points, of course. But then to achieve this, minimizing the cost of producing services or products, they try to maximize the use of resources, and these resources could be environment resources, extracting more from the environment, or it can be people, can be their suppliers, using the leverage they have over their suppliers to basically just look at their own profitability. And this is a thinking that has been practiced before sustainability becomes a big topic, right? But then in this new framework of sustainability, now I'm trying to a little bit deviate from only the ESG. I mean, just looking at the sustainability of the industry. This, getting to a sustainable industry and a low carbon economy, companies have to think differently and consider new type of KPIs and, criteria that are not necessarily similar to this traditional model of thinking. Especially in the West, you see the companies are basically built on profitability, no matter what happens to their supply chain, no matter what happens to their customer. They just need to be profitable and grow, and this grow is kind of pushing them to extract more and do more and more. So this is also the education, classic education is trained to, to help companies to achieve this kind of business model that they have. So this starts from, this change in thinking and this change of operating that is basically pushed now by ESG. It starts from procurement. So it starts from in the whole value chain of the company. You need to see this kind of transformation of thinking. Starting from procurement, where you procure the resources, being now material, being people, services, whatever it is. Now companies, starting from the procurement, that earlier stage, the companies are responsible for what happens down their supply chain. This German, for example, one example is the German Supply Chain Act. Now companies are responsible for what happens down their supply chain, even if the material comes from China. They get penalized for that, right? So that's a different thinking. In their operation, they are wholly responsible for the waste and emissions. So, imagine that companies are now thinking, okay, how to balance the price point of the production versus the offset of the carbon. They might be able to produce something very cheap, but then they have to pay a lot on offsetting the carbon. So that's a different thinking, and also in the distribution and market activities, they are held responsible for the impact of the product on the environment. So this is simply, if what I mentioned is the value chain of the company, and then across this you can put different functions, different people, starting from the board and the stakeholder and CEO, strategy, where to sell, where to buy, where to operate, down to the level of people who are working in the factories or people who are in the HR. How to function to meet those new KPIs is a new topic, and pretty much impacts everyone in a company. Now, if you look at the the job market, the skills that are required for people to get into these companies, you can already imagine that these companies start considering new criteria in hiring people who can help them in this transformation, not only to execute the transformation, but also create the business case for the transformation, because still, fortunately or unfortunately, we are still within this economy that is driven by growth and profit. So we have to find a way to create the business case of sustainability until the day that hopefully a new kind of thinking comes in place that is a level beyond the current framework.
Thank you very much, Rusbek. So basing on your insights about the changing environment, in spite of the fact that, as you mentioned, still most of companies are driven by profit and growth, there are increasing expectations and even requirements, I would say, that in order to stay competitive, and as Dalius was saying, especially probably for big companies, not for small yet and medium-sized companies, it is necessary to be sustainable. So it's at core of business activities already by now, especially if we are thinking about big businesses. So Mariano, I'm turning again to you, and I would like to ask you to share your insights, how companies might lead the way for sustainability, and what has to be done internally in businesses in order to stay competitive, to stay ahead nowadays.
Yes, Virginia, and I think it is a very complex issue, and I don't think it has a single answer. I don't have the right answer at the moment, because it is evolving and is continuously changing. But towards it should be leading us is a standard on sustainability reporting, a methodology on how you're going to be doing your internal reporting for sustainability, and what are the key factors that you need to be tracking up against. And then it goes down the chain inside the organization on how are you going to be measuring those KPIs as part of your integral strategy, how you're going to be applying them, and what is the time frame that you're going to have to apply them. Whilst at the same time, you need to keep your organization transparent and without necessarily implied quotas. Like, for example, if you will have an issue as part of your sustainability on representation of women in finance or in executive roles, what is it that needs to happen today? How your organization needs to look like, to the point that Rusbek made from the HR perspective, how your organization looks like today for you to achieve the goal that you want to achieve, and what is the implementation that needs to happen for that goal to be achieved without having fictional quotas, because quotas are not, in my opinion, are not going to solve the problem. The quotas are just going to lead the way for people to be pushing through goals that are not sustainable. It needs to have a cultural impact, needs to have a standard on how you're measuring it, and needs to have a cultural change for that measurement to be sustainable and for that chain to continue growing over time. So, as one of my good friends in Moody's will tell me, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we have to go through the journey, and we have to be, although we have to act with urgency, as there are certain aspects that I think we can implement today, there are some other aspects that we're going to have to be learning about, like the standard, like how do you report internally? How do you make your disclosures transparent enough for having a third party able to challenge them and take that challenge as a feedback for you to improve rather than contest it. So I think those elements are going to be crucial for us to be able to put ourselves on track of a good journey that is going to start rendering fruits in the very near future. There are some quick wins that we can make because there is a lot of data that organizations already have internally. Certainly on the HR front, everybody has enough data internally in HR for you to tackle some of those issues from the people perspective. How do you move people to your office? Do you need to move people to the office? How much energy are you using to run your systems? What is your real estate footprint, and what are the risks around that? How is your business sustainable from the finance perspective as well? So there are so many different factors that we need to combine that I think that the urgent measure that we need to develop is that methodology and that standard.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I liked your insight that it's not sprint but marathon. And also that insight that it's cultural change needed. So it means that really, in order to become sustainable company, it takes time, it takes efforts, and we'll get back to that. What is needed within businesses to make those changes, because they are not happening so fast. Again, I would like to build on your insights and get back to Rusbek with his extensive experience within different industries. So Rusbek, if you could share with us your experience and your insights about sustainability practices within different industries. Are those requirements different for different industries? How do they differ if they do, or what do they have in common?
It's a great discussion here, and it also links to what was discussed just a couple of minutes before by Mariano. You know, unfortunately, still we are in a situation that we lack a sort of a standard that really defines what different companies need to report. So when it comes to, I mean, starting from the first question, okay, what and how to report, there is still no consensus there, which is still a problem, but it's, you know, it's not that it's going to stay a problem for a long time. Good news are coming that at least in European region, standards are being defined and also going to be enforced by the government, by the European Commission to companies to report, and that will kind of create a similar framework for everyone to report on. But then the details, of course, will be different per industry. So although the goal of all different industries should be and will be to meet the SDG goals, the net zero goals, and to help to reduce the impact on the climate and the environment, but it doesn't and it shouldn't stop there. Of course, it goes beyond the carbon also, as was mentioned in the past, and the GHG shouldn't be the only goal. You know, biodiversity, water crisis, poverty, inequality, healthcare, human rights, you know, diversity, all of these are parts of these sustainability goals. So some of these are similar between different industries, and some of them are specific. So if you look at it from the regulations and compliance perspective, then we will find that there are directives that are similar between different industries, like the German Supply Chain Act that I mentioned in the past. But there are also some directives that may apply to specific industries. For example, we have the plastic tax directive that came in UK a couple of weeks ago, if you have been following the news. So that applies to plastic and packaging and for the virgin plastic. So that's a specific type of compliance and regulation, related to sustainability in Europe that is coming for specific industries. Or we have it for, the carbon tax, which is being employed to aluminium, steel, and some of the raw material that is imported to Europe. So that will, for example, impact certain industries like automotive industry or steel industry, especially, for example, Tata Steel in Netherlands is now kind of, they are thinking what to do with this because they import a lot of things from out of Europe, and that kind of the impact of this tax will be on the material cost, which might actually be a good thing because it will at the end improve, or kind of enforce even the circular economy in the market. But when it comes to execution of the sustainability strategies, we see many variations. So then per industry, it could be quite different. For example, if you take water utility, a major problem over there is the leakage and the flood and the overflow. But whereas if you go to telco industry, for example, the majority of sustainability challenges for them related to the emission is closer to e-waste and energy management, or sustainability of their IT solutions and the cloud solutions they have in the telco. For example, for media and broadcasting is a quite different problem comparing to utility. If you go to pharmaceutical industry, the problems are again different, because pharmaceutical is again a specific sector where you have also compliance. So for example, maybe the plastic act that I explained in UK, it may not apply to pharmaceutical, because in pharmaceutical you are dealing with people's health. So the packaging of the material, packaging of the drugs and the and the pills is quite an important thing. So it might be that even the same act or directive can be interpreted differently per industry, which also flows down to how it is executed per industry. But at the end, I think a greatest step forward that we are seeing coming is this EU taxonomy, which is a classification system to establish a list of sustainable economy activities and then detail it out per industry. And I think it will play a big role and very important role, at least in Europe, to scale up the sustainable investment and implement the European Green Deal. And I'm pretty sure that other regions, out of Europe, will to some extent have to follow. I already see it, for example, in Australia, in New Zealand, we see it in North America, that especially companies that are working a lot with Europe, they have to follow some of these European vision and standards anyway. Also, China is kind of one way or another is following the same thing. And we see that this is kind of some sort of consensus, I guess, will be coming, especially by 2024, when the CSRD will be kind of enforced one way or another in Europe, and companies will have to report in a certain way.
Thank you very much, Rusbek. So you were mentioning that there is increasing legal regulation towards sustainable practices in businesses. Probably we've seen more of that regulation lately in European context, but as you mentioned, it's getting worldwide. However, still, as some of you already mentioned, that still there are no common standards in a lot of industries, no common approaches what sustainability means. And since there is that expectation that businesses are changing their business models, changing their activities to become more sustainable as environment is expecting them. So Dalius, I am turning to you again, and I would like to ask you, what is your feeling about a lot of greenwashing practices? Because even European Commission announced recently in a survey that almost half of those declarations by businesses that are declaring to be sustainable practices, etc., they are not really true. So how to deal with that? And when should we do not feel trapped, by those declarations? So how to do about this?
Well, I think we are touching upon very important aspect. Of course, sustainability for some companies became an opportunity, and maybe some of the companies, some of the businesses took that opportunity with a bit overly enthusiastic. Yeah, so declaring things that might not be proven by the data, or sometimes even not true. So one good example of that is for instance, one of the climate activist think tanks has made a survey of so-called ESG investment funds, right? So they found almost 600 of these ESG labeled investment funds, and they checked upon them regarding the compliance towards Paris Climate Agreement, right? Because Paris Climate Agreement is one of the official references or official standards that are available at the moment. And it turned out that only around 55% of these funds complied with Paris Agreement KPIs. So it means that half of them say they are ESG, and they don't, they are not really. And then they took 130 so-called climate funds, which are even more directly directed towards climate targets. And they checked again according to the Paris Agreement, and they found that only 70% comply. Okay, so there's a huge gap between declaration and performance at the moment, and we see that in many situations. And of course, regulation, when it comes, it will kind of take care of that, because there will be a clear standard. What do you need to report? Currently, it is mainly driven by self-reported data, and of course, often driven by self-labeled goals. Okay, so we have some funny situations. For instance, some businesses use best-in-class definition rather than clean. So they say, well, producing energy from gas is not quite clean, but still it's best in class because it's much cleaner than producing energy from coal. So why don't we say that gas produced electricity is ESG investment? And sometimes we have the situations like that, and these situations do not increase the trust, right? But then if I look at it from the other side, some people come to their bank and say, I want to invest in a green thing, in sustainable things. So what do you offer me? And then the bank says, oh, here you go. These are the ESG funds that you can, invest, or these are the climate funds. And then these people get surprised because they find out that in his or her climate fund, the major holding is, for instance, ExxonMobil, which is, an oil and gas company. And they get surprised by that and they get frustrated, which clearly indicates that all of us, without any exceptions, need to build some critical level of knowledge about sustainability, right? Education is lacking because no one taught us in school about sustainability. Maybe nowadays they already do, as Mariano rightly mentioned. The new generation is already much more savvy in this topic. However, most of the people need a basic knowledge, and based on that knowledge, critical thinking about what is towards greenwashing, essentially, about what is declared, and be able to somehow make decisions based on their knowledge. Even more competence is required within businesses. Even more competence is required within regulators and the government, because all these parties have an important role as a stakeholder in making sustainability real, and everybody needs to know what they are doing. And today, if we take an average company, even if it's listed and multinational, there will be a very limited number of people who can calculate, for instance, CO2 footprint, or check if the calculation is right, if they sit on the, let's say, in the regulator office, right? So this becomes really, a gray zone, so to say. And one thing is to say everybody should be sustainable. Another thing is to implement it. And the implementation is very often dependent on the competence and knowledge. For instance, we have seen some very interesting cases, of course, often related to scandals, right, across industries. Volkswagen Dieselgate is one of them, but I would like to point out another one, which was in the Netherlands. First off, in the history, the court case against Shell Corporation, asking or blaming them not setting enough ambitious strategy goals towards CO2 reduction. And first it looked maybe a bit like a joke, but in the end of the day, the court, which is now, of course, being challenged by Shell, but the first decision was that the company should change the strategy and increase its ambition towards CO2 reduction, which is, something that is not business as usual for the business world. So we are facing a huge change, cultural change, as Rusberg said, and Mariano, I think, mentioned the same, but also changing the way we do business. And for this, we need to unlearn the old way and learn or relearn some things in the new way. And that will take not only competence, but also a high level of courage. But we start individually, and individually we start from the board level. Again, speaking about same Shell Corporation, the latest news is that the board members individually are being sued for making this decision, that they voted for the decision which was wrong because it was not according to Paris Agreement, climate agreement. So it means that you cannot just sit back in your board chair and relax because the justice and activists might come after you, which is good because activists, whether they are climate think tanks, very active lawyers, and oftentimes active investors, minority investors who have very clear goals towards implementing sustainability in their shareholding companies, they have competence. They learn a lot. And the more people will learn about sustainability, and not only about the concept or strategic point of view, but also about how to implement it, how to measure, how to have data-based evidence, how to monitor and report. And Mariano was already telling us it might take 100 of data points for any given company to have a clear picture of what is their ESG profile. It's huge amount of data and difficult to handle, and also this data point has to be has to have some sort of evidence. It cannot be just out of head numbers. So there will be big demand for people and competence within companies, within regulators, within banks, within governments to implement the whole sustainability shift, the new agenda, so to say.
Thank you very much, Daliau. So you are turning our discussion into a very practical approach, and I'm very glad about this angle. And actually, while you were talking, we received a question in the chat box in relation to measuring sustainability practices. So now I will be turning again to Mariano and asking him how it would be possible to measure sustainable practices and why it is so important. Why it is so important, I probably can already help you answering myself, avoid that greenwashing declarations. But if you could help us to see why it is so important from business side itself, and how to measure that impact, that a lot of companies are trying to declare that they are implementing sustainability practices.
Right. Let me try to give it a go, Virginia. I would say, why is it important? Because what you cannot measure, you will never get done. So that's point number one. So you have to measure it, and you have to have a methodology behind it. But similar to what Rusbek and Dalius were mentioning before, I mean, we need to come to the realization that ESG and sustainability is going to drive major changes on the way companies operate. Rusbek already mentioned on the supply chain, for example. Let's put a clear example on mergers and acquisitions. It's going to be a critical, important point before you can acquire a company that you will be able to verify and validate all the ESG score profile that company has before you can onboard them. And let's give a very simple example. Imagine that you're going to acquire an IT company, and in your current sustainability, in your current ESG score on your diversity, you have a very good balance between female and male workers, but you acquire an IT company that has 90% males. So that's going to trigger a significant change on the way you're going to be reporting next year. That's just one example. Another example is how many subcontracts this company has been doing and how they have been procuring their stuff, because you're going to acquire 100% of that risk once you get it on board. So as I very honestly mentioned before, this methodology on what do you need to measure and how you're going to be measured, it is currently being developed. And there are more and more companies that are developing their own standards. And there are more and more companies that claim they can give you consultation on it. But in reality, there is just a handful of companies that can give you an honest consultation on that. And there is just a handful of companies that have developed a science-based data measurement. is not just, I want to start measuring 3 key data points and reporting on that. You need to have the methodology and you need to have the skill set behind that. So some of the roles that you're going to start seeing more and more popping up in organizations is sustainability reporting, is going to be ESG scoring, is going to be data governance around ESGs. So you're going to have to create those jobs internally just for you to keep on the methodology and keep on tracking what you need to be tracking. But a good way to have that transparency and be able to allocate yourself in the right way. I mean, I would hope that similar to what happened in fintech a few years ago, the EU could develop a sandbox for testing your reporting methodology. A sandbox where you're not going to be penalized, but you're going to be actually informed on what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, and what you're doing wrong, how do you need to address it. I think is one good way for encouraging more and more businesses to get into the transparent, honest disclosures. If you can have a third party validating those disclosures, you're going to be able to address the problem. If you just want to have them on the profile of your company as part of your marketing strategy, you're heading for a significant crash down the line, because you're not going to be able to sustain yourself with something that is not verifiable, something that is not data science based. And more importantly, you're eventually going to start losing traction with your workforce. If you lose that credibility, both as a brand, as an employer, you're going to have significant challenge to stay afloat. And the second part on that question on how the models are going to be changing around the globe, Rosbeck also mentioned on the supply chain. This is going to create a disruption on big corporations that has been for the past decades looking into profitability, as he mentioned before. And when you look into profitability and the way you operate your company, that takes a significant impact, because you like to make global contracts for everything. It doesn't matter if your global contract will end up costing you more in certain countries, as long as in other countries it doesn't cost you that much and it balances out. But let me give you a clear example on procurement on staples for an office. You get a global contract with a big brand that is allocated in certain countries, but not necessarily Lithuania, for example. And if I will buy my staples through that global contract, they will come from another country, Estonia. So if I buy pens that will come from Estonia to be delivered to Lithuania just to save money because we have one contract rather than managing 30 different contracts, so it saves you money, but it's not really sustainable. It's not really a good point of what's your ESG score. So I think the quicker the organizations realize that you need to start informing yourself and educating yourself about what is coming ahead for you to start operating in a way and making the changes today that will make the impact tomorrow, the better. That's what I'm saying. It's a marathon, it's a journey that needs to start today for you to start making a progressive impact as years goes by.
Thank you very much. So we hear about importance of measuring, about importance of being able to evaluate impacts. Since we have only a very few minutes left, Rosbeck, I'm turning to you, asking a question. What kind of specialists are needed? Because as Mariana was saying, that in order to evaluate, you have to have knowledge, you have to have competences. So what kind of competences businesses are still lacking in order to be able to evaluate its impact on environment?
Yeah. Great discussion, especially I think was it Mariano or Darius, I don't remember, that you said what you cannot measure, you cannot act on it, right? So I think it's becoming more and more obvious these days, especially in the context of sustainability, that this measurement goes beyond just the technology. It's not only about the capability of having data scientists and data engineers who can create a digital solution. So that's of course a part of it. We see a lot of requests from our customers and clients that they want more and more data engineers and data scientists working on ESG related matters. But it also gets into areas beyond that. Is, for example, some of we have a customer, I worked with them last year, that they have 36,000 suppliers, 36,000 suppliers globally, right? So if you want to improve the ESG score of this this company regarding their supply chain, well, you have to establish a healthy communication with 36,000 suppliers, right? So that requires a different type of skills than, typically in the past that, you kind of, it's a one-way communication. You give me a better price, you are my supplier. I mean, it doesn't work anymore. So you need, this kind of stakeholder management, better communication skills, understanding how to create this new economy model, a new way of thinking about the economy and the business case is also becoming quite important in this measuring the sustainability and its impact and how to do it, but also creating the business case. On the topic of measurement, also it comes, we have to think also beyond reporting. When you want to also get it, if you think about, for example, a factory, if you want to make a factory more sustainable, you have to be able also to measure certain things that are typically not measured in factories. In a factory, you don't have a sensor everywhere that measures everything, right? You measure things that are related to the production. But if you want to now have a right measurement for electricity, for energy management, for, emission, for water, many of those things are not necessarily measured in factories. Now, if you imagine that audit comes in Europe and you need to report on this and then get audited on this, it kind of takes this to a different level of visibility into operation. Or if you are supposed to be able to explain what's happening down in the supply chain, you need to be able to get that data out from the supply chain, right? So that kind of brings the context of the concept of data sharing. Data sharing is not really something that is practiced in the industry today because people try to keep the data for themselves and protect the information, the business confidential information, IPs and so. Now, for example, I'm not going to promote any technology, but for example, blockchain is a new technology which only tries to fix this problem. So I imagine in the coming years, there will be new technologies that try to fix some of these problems, right? And these technologies also become one way or another related to, important for sustainability. It's not about measurement. I just want to mention another technology, for example, in decarbonization, carbon capture. This was not really a big topic in old days, but now it's a topic. So what I want to try to say is that this is an evolving thing, things that needs to be measured and things that needs to be acted on. And with this evolution and this journey, new skills and new education will be necessary for the new generation.
Thank you very much. So you explained that potential needs along all value chain within business of measuring impact. And when we started our discussion, Dalius was saying that it starts from the board. So Daliu, now I'm turning to you. Yes, it starts from the board. Is it sufficient to introduce some sustainability manager within a company in order to measure impact and to feel that you are putting a lot of efforts to become sustainable business?
It's a good starting point, but it's not enough probably in the end of the day. Of course, as I said, the first step is to have someone within the company for whom ESG or sustainability is first job, right? The number one job. Previously, and still in some businesses, we have people who are, for instance, the head of marketing and sustainability, right? Or in finance, we have, investor relations manager and ESG manager, and roles like that, which is basically, fixing the problem, but not making the change. So for change to happen, it should be someone's job number one. So then, when it goes further, probably there will be more people. But in the end of this change process, or when the process is sustainable, this change is sustainable, everybody in the company will have part of their responsibilities related to sustainability and ESG. Today we can talk. It is a regular finance and regular investment and sustainable investment. Regular finance, sustainable finance. In the future, there will be only one finance which will be sustainable. Only one investment that will be sustainable. Like today, everybody, all businesses are used to and are able to report their financial figures, financial reporting every year. In the future, this will be the same for the ESG reporting. and this future is not far. Mariano will not let me lie. I think we are talking about 5-7 years maybe from now, where most of businesses will have to submit their ESG reporting just like they do financial reporting at the moment, which means that everybody who is related to this work will have to understand and have sufficient knowledge of the concept and the tools and the methods in order to be able to run the business. And those who will be preparing early along the way, they will win. And those who will, be late, they will pay the most, both with direct costs of hiring consultants and paying higher fees, but not only, also with the cost of reputation. More and more things related to ESG and sustainability will come to surface and will be criticized publicly, and companies need to also prepare for that.
Thank you very much, Dalo. Your insight is that those specialists will be needed all along the value chain within almost probably every single company very soon. As we have business representatives in our discussion, Mariano, how many of those specialists you are ready to employ in your company?
Very good question, Virginia. We already employ hundreds of them across different geographies. It's part of the key investments that we have done publicly in the last 12 months or so. If I'm not mistaken, it's above $2 billion that we have invested in companies that we acquired, whether in climate risk change or in different aspects of the ESG that we want to integrate. So how many do you need? I think is yet to be seen. Obviously, Moody's has two aspects of it, our internal ESG scores and our business. But I agree with Dalius. I think you need to have a person that his job is to be ahead of those ESGs. Later on, the chief operating officer, the chief people officer, the chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer will need to combine forces to ensure that all the data that is being gathered can actually achieve the score that you want to give. And to Rusbek's point, I agree that one of the key skill sets that companies are currently looking for is towards the data science, data analytics, and software engineers that can be modeling how those data points that you need to be analyzing to score are being developed.
Thank you very much. So thanking all the discussants today, I have to say that we have only very few minutes left. I would like to continue because I feel that we can dig much deeper and to go into detail about a lot of sustainability issues in relation to necessity to develop methodologies, accountability, etc., etc. But I promised at the very beginning of our discussion, surprise, breaking news. So since our discussion turns to the direction of necessity to have those specialists in different industries and different companies, and growing understanding that it's not only responsibility of board and someone who is in charge of sustainability initiatives, but those competences are needed all along the value chain, as Rusbek and Mariano and Dalius were mentioning. So ISM has surprise for all the listeners and spectators of our discussion. So, but with great pleasure, I would like to announce that we designed and we are going to introduce new master's program on sustainability, how to manage sustainability of business. Briefly, I will be presenting you with some information, and if you will have any questions in relation to the program, in relation to our initiatives, in relation to some topics that we touched upon during our discussion, please do use few minutes that we still have, couple of minutes in the chat box, and it will be a pleasure for us to briefly answer those questions. So I hope that you have the information about the program in your screens. More information will come. Soon we will be organizing information events about the program. Of course, all spectators, all listeners are more than welcome to approach the university with any questions that you might have. And if we do not have more questions in the chat box, I was trying to cover some of the questions during our discussion. I would like to thank very, very much experts of sustainability, people who are dealing with sustainability issues already for some time, that they are familiar with necessity, with practices that are present already, and necessities that are coming for businesses to change. So thank you very much for Uzbek. Thank you very much for Mariano. Thank you very much for Dalius. It was great pleasure, and I feel that it was too short.
Thank you.
Too short time to discuss all those issues. Thank you very, very much.
Sure. Thank you. Have a good day.